Welcome into the Husker247 podcast. I'm Michael Bruntz, joined by Brian Christopherson. It's game week again, finally. After the second bye, we everybody got their second rest, got rejuvenated for the final 5 games. Also, a big commitment for Nebraska on the bye week, so it wasn't completely idle for that group, but. Brian, let's just jump right into it and breeze through this. Let's start with recruiting because that was kind of the story of the week. Not only Nebraska's coaches being on the road and trying to do some work there, but Malachi Coleman, 4-star athlete, wide receiver, potential defensive edge player, but likely wide receiver from Lincoln East commits to Nebraska. What were kind of your initial thoughts on that? I don't know that it was a huge surprise that he stayed home, but I don't know that it was necessarily a slam dunk for Nebraska that was going to be the case.
Yeah, I think in those cases, I try to do this, Bruns, where you feel like a recruit has been angling toward a certain decision for maybe 4 or 5 months or however long it was. And so when it happens, you can occasionally, it's human nature to be like, well, of course, and I think you got to be careful with that. And you got to almost step back to like, they finished it. They got a commitment of what is he ranked in our system right now? 67, 70, something like that. So you got one of the top 100 recruits in the country. Yes, he was in your backyard, but he had a lot of people knocking on his door. And I think it felt like from the first interview he ever did, when Mickey Joseph sort of came to meet him for the first time, or they had their first phone call or whatever it was, that Mickey was a half step ahead of the competition. And Nebraska maybe had other advantages, of course, with maybe some NIL opportunities here and stuff like that. But give Mickey his due on that one. He recognized, I think, from the beginning, not only is this a prospect with some big upside, but perception matters a whole lot too right now when you're trying to get this program rolling, and you don't want to lose a guy who can drive to the stadium in 15 minutes. Those are the guys you got to have, and they got them. So let's not just gloss over it and say, well, that was supposed to happen, because in this day and age, nothing's a layup anymore.
What a big change that Nebraska made strategically after Mickey Joseph came was they wanted to get him kind of spearheading in-state recruiting, especially in Lincoln and Omaha. Those were two big areas that Nebraska needed to get better at. Mickey kind of grabbed that bull by the horns, and you hear Malachi Coleman say, straight up, if Mickey Joseph weren't at Nebraska, he's probably not picking Nebraska's hat off that table on Saturday. Mm-hmm. I guess, that kind of feeds into the whole, okay, well, what's Mickey's involvement going to potentially be down the road? But I guess, what do you kind of make of the approach that Nebraska's had recruiting in state since he's kind of been there? Because, Barrett Root is still very involved. He's out at schools too, but in Omaha, it's Mickey making the offers. It's him kind of driving the bus there.
It's not like they weren't using other staff members at times throughout the state during the Frost era, and other guys didn't get out there. However, it was certainly a primary guy, and it was Barrett Rood, and it felt like to me they were missing an angle there by not having another, like a 1-2 punch, and then Mickey Joseph gave him the 1-2. And Root sometimes takes some flack because of that last cycle, where 4 or 5 guys escaped. And I don't know. I'm not as hard on him on that one, because he was batting a pretty high percentage until that cycle. And it did feel like kind of a year where you ran into a bunch of guys who had the same mind, like, I want to get out of here. And would have that been different if Mickey had been here? I don't know. It would have been pretty interesting to watch. But I do think their strategy is much better. Wouldn't you say, Brunch? Just like the fact that, like, you get a couple of different voices, and like, maybe this guy really connects better with this certain recruit, this guy with this one, and you're able to I think it gives you versatility, I guess would be the word. So that's how I sort of see it. I don't know why they weren't doing this previously with more of a 2-pronged approach in state.
Yeah, I know that at least in some of the 24 class recruitments that, Travis Fisher was stopping by on some defensive backs. You saw Greg Austin out a little bit before he was let go, but never just kind of that focus. And I think, since Mickey's been the interim head coach, what you've seen too is you've seen a lot of offers to 2026 recruits. There's been multiple out in Omaha. There was been a couple 2025 offers in Omaha, and they're getting much better. I think Nebraska is at, if there's a kid that you feel is going to be worthy of an offer in your backyard, just make the offer and start building the relationship. And I think that's kind of how Nebraska has to operate going forward, because until you kind of turn things around on the field, I think you need to be better about evaluating kids earlier. You got to build that relationship earlier, and you got to get kids thinking Nebraska earlier. I mean, I just think that's, been one kind of unfortunate, result of Nebraska's struggles on the field, is you just have allowed kids' minds to wander a little bit about other schools and going different places when, that there's a big time football atmosphere right down the road if they want it. So, so this, I think, is an important win. We'll see what happens, obviously, over the next 5 weeks with how Mickey might be involved in this thing. But that was a big win that I think Nebraska kind of needed in their first commitment since the week of the game in Ireland with Cameron Leonard. So
yeah.
Kind of, I guess, shifting gears a little bit, but still along the Coleman conversation. What do you make of the future of that wide receiver room? Because I think that's ultimately where Malachi ends up. I think, you've had various wide receivers coaches and people responsible for recruiting that position over the last few years and have not really done so with great success. You've got most of the guys that are contributing right now have come in via the portal. So how the heck do you kind of make sense of what that room potentially looks like in the future? Now that you have Malachi Coleman in that group that also includes a Marion Miller, Barry Jackson, and Jaden Doss.
Well, if Mickey is around, whether he's the permanent head coach or still coaching the receivers, a year from now, I think what you're going to see is that Mickey's going to have a shorter leash. He said this much with receivers. And so if you're not like within a year or two, like looking like you can actually factor in here, he is going to use the portal fully and all that stuff. And, I remember he told us in an interview, there's good 20, those 21-year-olds who are in the portal, they were big time recruits themselves usually 3 years ago. And so and now they're men, they've grown up and so he kind of likes that. But I do think you've got to get that base settled where you get 3 or 4 guys who are prep recruits who come into the program and they really steadily develop, where you get a little from them the first year, it's tracking right. And by year 2 or so, it's kind of off and running, because I feel like that's a position that's maybe different than the trenches a little bit, where you can get on the field quicker if you've got the right goods. Like, it's just sort of one of those spots where like if you're a D lineman, it can be very difficult as a 18 or 19-year-old to play in the Big Ten, just because your body has to grow into it. At wide receiver, I feel like you can kind of work around that a little bit in what your requirements are. So they need 2 or 3 from this class they got now, Bruns, to hit. They need to settle it. I get these jokes, you probably get them too on Twitter all the time, about, another wide receiver. And it kind of goes back to like the Keith Williams era, or when he was a wide receivers coach and other stuff. And there were all these offers. And so there's always all this talk about receiver. This guy's visiting, that guy's visiting. And so people are kind of wide receivered out a little bit with recruiting, and they kind of think it's way too many of those guys, not enough trenches guys. But if you actually step back from it, they haven't had a great success rate of keeping receivers rolling that they actually recruit, or getting them here or keeping them here. And that's what's got to happen. And that's why you keep hearing so much about wide receiver recruiting, is because it's a cycle. It's spinning guys out, and you got to find new ones. And hopefully a few of these guys actually stick for a while now.
What's the list of wide receivers in the last like 8 years who have actually made it to senior day? It's like Stanley Morgan Jr. and Mike Williams.
Yeah.
That's the group. That's it.
Think of how many didn't make it a year, or, I mean, they showed up, and we can get into a whole different era and go down a rabbit hole with that. But, even guys who would sometimes have good springs, like a Darian Grimm was a name from the past, popped up they liked, and he wasn't in the program, after a few months. And so he's just an example of how it's kind of been, where there's always like these headline hopes about guys, but it really hasn't had much substance to it. And so now they need the substance.
Yeah. I mean, that position is a little bit of a good example, I think, for kind of the rest of the program, where you get highly ranked guys in, but you can't develop them or bring them along if they're not there. I mean, that's been the toughest part for that group. And with a lot of the young guys in the program right now, if you look at the wide receivers who are suiting up game after game, and especially the home games, a lot of those young wide receivers aren't even in uniform for non-conference games. And
Nope.
and that's a concern.
I think Bonner is a guy they like.
Yep.
And
he's
Bonner,
traveled.
yeah, and Bonner's a guy who can, don't forget about him. And DeColis Crawford was injured. So, I mean, there could be two guys there. We'll see what happens with that. That's a tough deal when you get right to a campus and you're hurt. I think it helps that he has such a close relationship with Mickey. So maybe those two, but you're right. There's some others in the last cycle or two that they're not in the equation right now. And one last thought on Malachi. He's a 4-star guy. And we talk about developing players all the time, Bronson, getting the most out of them by year 3 or 4. Along with that, Nebraska needs its 4 stars to be 4 stars. They like need that to start being where a top 100 guy like is that guy. Some programs, when they really are elite, you'll see a player make a play for another team, and you're like, well, of course. I remember him when he was a 2019 recruit and he was ranked 32nd. Of course he's doing that. I feel like it's been too few and far between for Nebraska on those cases of those guys sort of meeting where they were. And I think it's made I shouldn't even say this, but it has made probably some people skeptical around here of the ratings. But I only say that to say in other places, those ratings are proving very accurate with guys. So I don't think those ratings are just bunk or anything is my point. I'm saying Nebraska, for whatever reason, their guys who are rated highly have not hit, I don't think, like some other guys who are rated highly elsewhere.
Yeah. That's a trend that has to be reversed quickly. Should we shift over to the guys that will be on the field on Saturday? We got Brett Bielema, a ranked Illinois team,
Yep,
coming into Memorial Stadium. I don't know that a lot of people would have predicted that at the start of the season. You probably could have made a fair amount of money if you had predicted that and backed it up with a little cash. What are you let's just kind of get into this game a little bit, but what do you kind of make of this matchup for Nebraska? Because you've got, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and Illinois left on the schedule. And I would put Illinois as probably the second toughest game left on Nebraska's schedule. Is that fair, do you think? Behind Michigan?
Yeah, it's up there. It definitely could be. I don't want to sell Illinois short because of the teams I've seen, certainly in the West, they're the most complete, we've seen this year. I think their defense has really fed off. They haven't played maybe the best offenses so far, but you can just tell when you watch them that they play off each other so well, and everybody, like, it's one of those groups, like, everybody knows their role, what they're supposed to do. And Ryan Walters, I know you're a fan, I'm a fan. He's going to be a head coach somewhere at some point, maybe next year for all I know. But he's got a defense that's like number 1 or number 2 in like the 4 or 5 major stats across the country. So it's pretty amazing when you consider when Nebraska went to Champaign for that week 0 game last year to start the Bielema era. That was a program no one was really thinking about. And I think thought, well, it'll take 3, 4, 5 years. Bielema's a good Big Ten coach. He'll make them a 6-win, 7-win team, and that'll be that kind of. That was my thought. And I never would have guessed they'd be right here, right here, right now. I'm thinking of the song "Right Here, Right Now." That song that starts that when I said that. But I don't like this matchup for Nebraska on paper necessarily, Bruns, because Chase Brown's one of the best running backs in the country, and then you got a defensive line, I think, for Illinois that's thinking it's going to maybe feast on this Husker O-line, which hasn't given us a lot of reason to believe in it. So there's that part of me. And then the other part is I think there's so much parity in the Big Ten that I still kind of think Nebraska is going to find 2 or 3 explosive plays somewhere while scuffling through most of the game to make it really close with 5 minutes left. That's sort of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably where I'd lean with it too. I mean, the spread opened at 5 points in favor of Illinois. The thing that concerns me about this matchup, and you kind of hit on it a little bit, is Illinois knows who they are offensively. They've got a good running back. I think they've got a good Big Ten West offensive line. I think that, Brett Bielema has very quickly kind of said, this is who we are offensively. We're going to run the ball. They've got a better quarterback this year that's got some toughness and can make a few throws. He's not going to concern you maybe like Aiden O'Connell will, but, and then on the flip side of that, you've got Nebraska playing without Nick Henrich, without Luke Reimer, I would expect is probably going to be back, but we don't know that for sure. And, this is a Nebraska defense that's coming off of just giving up 178 on the ground to a walk-on freshman running back from Purdue. So that concerns me a little bit. At the same time, does Illinois have anybody that can run with Trey Palmer? I don't know. If the offensive line can give Casey Thompson just a little bit of time, I think there should be a couple deep plays there to be had, like you said. And, it's a home game. I think the fans are still behind this team, and we'll kind of see where they are coming out of the bye. Illinois is also coming out of a bye, but I think it's probably going to be another one of those, 4-quarter type games. And it feels like another instance where Nebraska's defense is going to have to make stops late and tackle well. Because if you're giving Illinois 3rd and short in this game, I just think you're in for a really long day that's going to play right into their hands and the way that defense can kind of control things.
My biggest question is the Husker defense, because even though the Nebraska O-line, when you think about that matchup, you're like, man, that's scary how that could go. And it could very well be that way. I can envision a game where Nebraska's offense looks pretty rough for like 90% of the snaps, but there are those explosives that are so explosive that might be what Nebraska has a little bit that some other squads Illinois hasn't had. That's maybe the thing that gives Nebraska, where if you want to talk yourself into it, Trey Palmer, even Anthony Grant, I know he's not had his best couple of weeks with having space to run, but if he had 145-yard run, Bruns, even if he beat his head against the wall for 4 quarters, but he has that one play, where he just gets loose and the stadium goes nuts. That's how you can win a game like this. If your defense can get a grip on things, sort of like they had in the second half prior to Purdue. I don't know. Do you think it can help that for the defense, even though Illinois is really good with Chase Brown running the ball, now maybe you feel like they're a little, I don't want to say they're one-dimensional, but you feel like you kind of know what you're going to get from them, as opposed to last week or 2 weeks ago against Purdue, where Nebraska gets gashed in the run. But part of that is you're also just scared to death of Charlie Jones and Aiden O'Connell. And at least now that part maybe allows you to kind of narrow in a little bit on what your main assignment is for this one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be curious to see if Nebraska just kind of tries to shut down the run and so basically says beat us on the path, beat us through the air. I mean, I think
Danny DeVito's grandson, show us what you got.
Check it over my head, Danny's grandson. No, I think that's kind of how you have to approach it. I mean, I think you got to take something away, and I think if Nebraska tackles well and if they get defenders to the ball, I feel reasonably confident that they can make it a 4-quarter game. Where it's going to be tough is if you get the inability to set the edge. Illinois really getting off tackle, kind of like Purdue was able to do, and find some space on the outside. I just think that's where you're going to have a lot of difficulty if you're Nebraska, and that scares me not only for this game, but you've got Minnesota on the other side of that, who's going to probably try to do the exact same thing. And then, you've got Michigan and Wisconsin and Iowa that are all kind of, cut from the same cloth. So coming out of the bye week, the defense to me needs to have a significantly better approach and performances than what they showed going into it. To you, I mean, does it need to almost kind of be like a Rutgers type game where it's low scoring, or do you think Nebraska tries to turn this into a track meet if they can?
With Mark Whipple, you never know. I mean, Whipple's kind of like, we're going to do what we do best, and I'm not going to veer from it. And but I think they've got to have some commitment to the run and kind of keeping some clock moving, even if it's not like giving them great results, but it's sort of like, hey, it's there. Like I think you've got to at least set it in front of them, like we could do this, and not just abandon it. I do think the Purdue game, in some ways, the way they got behind by 17 maybe factored into it. And then it was so obvious in that particular matchup. I don't know that Illinois, the way they're playing defense, you got to figure they have some guys that can maybe run with Trey. And, the Purdue game, it was so obvious nobody could, that it was almost like, how do you resist this? It's like, even if you kind of want to try to run the ball, you kind of got to go with the thing where it's like, we could score a 65-yard touchdown right here if we just do this. So I don't know. The matchup is not appealing to me for Nebraska. And then this is not good substance, and it's not how you should analyze a game, but I do get this way with sports. I feel like the Big Ten has a certain storyline that's developing, Brunts, where it's going to be a mess. And Nebraska beating Illinois just feels like the next part. Like, I can't get around that. There's something in me that says that could happen because, everything is just sort of falling into place for this to be like a 4-way tie. You know what I mean? If Nebraska can beat Illinois is the one team who could say, no, that's not how this is going. We're actually a 7-2 type team in this league. But I mean, Purdue is a great example. Like they beat Nebraska and they got a good win over Minnesota, but they go -2 in turnovers at Wisconsin, and that's the difference. So I think if Nebraska could actually go plus in that category, I think it will be a close game if that's the case.
Yeah, time of possession will be huge in this game. Nebraska cannot get killed in that metric like they have been, and also there's still just talking about the complete car crash that's the Big Ten West right now. There's still a very, very narrow window for Northwestern to make the Big Ten title game. So you still have that in. You still have that in play on October 25th if things break right. I don't think they will, but that's 1,000,000 to 1 telling me there's a chance situation.
And if Nebraska doesn't fumble on their own 20-yard line last time, remember Illinois was in here during the COVID season, and Luke McCaffrey started, and there was a first play where nobody thought it was a fumble. So avoid that beginning maybe too.
Yeah, let's avoid that. So real quickly, we'll finish on this. The basketball season started, kind of. You had an exhibition. Shadron State was in town. Give me 2 minutes of what you saw from this completely new look Fred Hoiberg team that suddenly has perimeter length and so some guys that like playing with each other.
Yeah, a couple of quick. They won 87-60. It was 44-38, which is a little closer than you want it with about 16 minutes left. But then Nebraska went on a huge run, and it was 80-46. They're up 34 by the time there was 5 minutes left. And so they really asserted themselves. Something to note that Hoiberg said, not surprising, but I think for people who are just passing by seeing the score, Nebraska basically was only running 2 sets. Like they was running one post set and one perimeter play on offense. They didn't want to show anything. So you got to factor that in. We weren't really seeing the offense. I like Jawan Gary Brunts. He even when he wasn't hitting his shot, he was getting his own rebound, and they played him kind of strange. They gave him a favorable matchup, so that probably was part of it. But he had 23 points in 20 minutes, 9 rebounds. He was just very active. Came off the bench. I think Denham Dawson. I don't want to overdo this because I don't think Dawson is like the 6th or 7th guy even yet. He's more like your 8th or 9th. But I see the young potential in him where he could, if he keeps growing, he's just a live wire. Like he gets his hands on the ball and he's a high flyer and stuff like that, where he might pop in this season for where they're playing in a Big Ten game and you want his defense and his activity, and he gets in there for 4 or 5 minutes and kind of gets the crowd rolling. I could see that. So Grissel looked good. He just was just workmanlike. I think that's how he's going to be. I just think you're going to get steadiness from him where, Verge was so up and down last year, Alonzo Verge. It was sometimes amazing to watch and sometimes it was really tough. And I think Grissel's just going to even that out a bit.
Verge currently top 5 in scoring in the Polish Professional Basketball League, whatever they call that. Glenn Watson Jr. also top 5. So a lot of Nebraska intrigue in Poland if you really want to find it. Last one, do you think that this is, it seems to me like, I'm going to take, broad brush the heck out of this based on one exhibition game, but it seems like a group that it's going to be a lot of guys averaging about the same amount of points rather than last year where it was, I don't want to say hero ball, but it felt like it at times.
I thought you were going to say it seems like a group that's going to make the Final Four in Jim Nance's final year covering the Final Four for CBS. Which was
that would be pretty improbable. But
that was big news headline the other day. But that's sort of what Emmanuel Bandumel said a couple weeks ago when he met with the media. He was talking about this is a group where really no one's overly concerned with being like the high points guy in that. They're going to spread the ball pretty well. And I do think it's going to be a team where your high point guy, even on successful days, could be 13, 14 points, but maybe you get 3 or 4 of those guys between 10 and 14 points. And that's a nice day at the office. So I think that's more of what we're looking for with this team as opposed to last year where you knew Bryce McGowan's might get 29 or Verge might do that on a given night, but then the next guy might have 11 and then the next guy has 6, that sort of thing. And I think that's good. I think Trev Alberts had an interesting comment last week on the radio about talking to coaches about also having teams that sort of appeal to this fan base and they identify with. And I think we've talked about it with last year's squad, not that they're bad guys, just their style of play with the one-on-one and all that. Nebraska fans checked out on that team pretty early, if we're honest. Like it wasn't just the record, it was just the style of play. I just don't think they connected with how they played defense and other stuff. And I do think this group is going to be different in that regard, where even if it's only 13 or 14 wins, people are kind of like, they're going to fight, they're going to be on the floor, all that stuff. And we'll see if that proves out.
First game at Pinnacle Bank Arena where they were selling alcohol. Did it get a little rowdy in there for Shattern State?
No, it wasn't. I did see a few people complaining about the prices, but I was like, what do you expect, people? If you're going to want to have a pop here, they're gonna get you. This
is a dollar beer night.
Yeah, this isn't Iguanas on Thursday night. It's in 2002. Where it was 50 cents a cup or 25 cents maybe.
Just bring a whole tray of them to the seat. That's what they want. 25-cent beer at Pinnacle Bank Arena. Just keep the Coors Light coming.
Yeah, the little plastic cups. But no, I didn't. No one had to be taken out or anything. Nobody was like down by the Shattern State bench, like
just letting them have it.
Yeah. Maybe that'll change when it gets a little more intense, but I'm thinking not. I think most people will be kept to like a 2-drink limit within the arena because of the prices, probably.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reasons why you price it that way, I think.
Yeah. So Nebraska has one more exhibition at Colorado, and then they open against Maine, just like the 2005 Nebraska football team did.
Yeah, Bill Callahan. It was 25. It was kind of a tough game. They won 25-7. I believe that would have been like the Steve Octavian era. I remember he had a play in that game.
Yeah, against the Black Bears. So we'll continue to follow that. I think you got anything else? That's all I got.
Nope, there should be plenty on the site with access here this week as they get ready for Illinois. So yeah, people should keep coming and recruiting. We got a Malachi Coleman brunch, but they offered 26 guys last week, so people should come to the site and check out all the stuff there.
A lot of junior college offers went out last week. Brian and I have been running those down, Schaefer as well. So we'll have all of that on the site. Hypecast coming up this week with the usual Fighting Illini week guest. So look forward to that. And keep checking the Husker247.com. And we'll talk to you, I guess, in a few days here with the Hypecast and all the coverage leading up to Nebraska and Illinois.